Anaxa is truly an incredible unit, probably to the point where he's honestly quite overtuned because of his insane flexibility and why I rate him around tier 0.5 to 0 across all game modes, and in this video I will be teaching you everything you need to know to make it the best use of his insane potential. Let's start with Relics, because at this point the chase priority should be fairly obvious, so I'm skipping that. For main stats, it's crit body, speed or attack boots, most of the time speed, attack percentage orb, and attack or ERR rope. I found an attack orb to perform better in almost every scenario at about 8% better. This is mostly due to the damage buffs he already gives himself at up to 180% or 240% at S1, which is quite ridiculous and hence why damage percentage is already quite saturated. Attack or ERR rope depends on the team you are using him in. If you are using Passkey, S1, Sunday or Tingyun, you should always be running attack rope because you already regenerate enough energy for a 2-turn ultimate after the first. If you have none of those and energy regen rope, then guarantees you are able to get the 2-turn ultimate, and you don't actually lose out on a ton of damage because a lot of the free-to-play evolution light cones give a ton of attack percentage that his S1 doesn't have. So it's not like his damage drops off a cliff just because you are using an energy regen rope. Honestly, without an ERR rope, he's missing only about 20 energy for that 2-turn rotation, so it might even be possible to use RNG from getting hit by enemies or defeating them to regenerate that missing energy for you. Though this can be a bit frustrating, you are getting away with free damage if it works, so I think it's a pretty decent trade-off. For most players, however, I would still recommend ERR because it's just much easier to play. For subsets, it depends a bit on the team you are using. For example, Sunday and RMC would give you a ton of crit damage already, not to mention his own 140% crit damage buff, so in general, more attack, speed or crit rate would be better. Speed is a bit dependent on your setup, but I think should always be the biggest priority until the breakpoint. For example, a Hypercarry team can easily run 135, but in dual carry, the higher the better usually, and with S5 Dance, 3B and Eagle, you require about 151.5 speed for the first cycle, or 151.3 for 2 cycles. Hence for stat goals, it's probably going to be around 2.8k to sometimes even mid to high 3k attack, depending on your main stats. You want to get as much crit rate in battle as possible, so you should account for things like Sunday, RMC or Izumo. And finally, crit damage is usually about low hundreds to low 200s depending on your light cones. Just remember to focus on crit rate over crit damage because Anaxa already gives himself so much crit damage. Next, we have Relic Sets. Anaxa is one of the most flexible characters to build. He can use Genius and Scholar, which I find quite fitting, Pioneer, Eagle, Rutidon, Izumo, and probably even Glamoth and Sigonia, though the last two may be a bit non-ideal. Genius is the best choice at S1 in Hypercarry teams because he can implant the Quantum Weakness, which means he gets the full 20% defense reduction, and he gets an additional 28% defense reduction from his base kit. For non-S1 Hypercarry teams, Pioneer usually performs better, assuming it works the way I think it does, but Scholar doesn't fall behind by much, ranging from as small as 0.5% worse to about 3% worse than Pioneer. Eagle is usually used in dual TPS teams, but honestly there is a way to make Eagle work even in Hypercarry teams, which I will explain later. For Rutidon versus Izumo, I found Izumo to be the better choice in dual carry teams, again, most likely because damage boost is already oversaturated, while attack and crit rate isn't. But Rutidon Arena should be the go-to for teams without a second evolution. Honestly, Glamoth might sort of work as well, even though it gives damage boost because of the extra attack, and Sigonia could be a pretty good choice in Perfection because you can defeat many enemies. Now for light cones, the performance obviously kind of differs based on the scenario he is used in. Firstly, for a Hypercarry scenario, the difference is pretty small between the light cones. Evolution is just quite free-to-play friendly. Great Cosmic Enterprise, Genius's Repose, Eternal Calculus, and The Day the Cosmos Fell all being very good options. Whereas in a dual carry scenario with the Herta, S1 throws more of its value because of the extra 10 energy that you can get, because other light cones would then have to run an energy regen rope, which is why the difference increases from 10 to almost 30%. Do note that if you are using Anaxa against non-wind weak enemies without E2, his performance will drop even further in such a scenario by about 20 to 40% across the board. Which is why I have this last part here, Cosmic Brute Force, where they have 20% wind rest. As you can see, it's just about a 20% decrease. Passkey is pretty much only useful in scenarios without Sunday or Tingyun, since in a Hypercarry team you can just regenerate the extra energy, which solves his energy issues, and even then it still performs worse when using an attack rope instead of ERR like the other icons, and hence why I think is the worst choice. Next we have teams and rotations. Anaxa can genuinely use just about everyone. There are probably even more teams that could potentially work, like a Super Break team or maybe even teams with Blade or Black Swan, even if non-ideal. But firstly, when it comes to playing Anaxa, he is one of the easiest characters in the game to use properly. He's able to get a consistent 2-turn ultimate and can even get a 1-turn ultimate at the start of the battle, and since it's a bounce attack, it doesn't really matter as much which enemy you are targeting. Really, all you need to do is use your skill or sometimes basic attack if you need skill points, and then just use your ultimate when it's up. There are some rare cases you may need to hold your ultimate, like with Eagle, but most of the time it's really brain dead and much easier to play than units like Casteris, Eaglea, Sele, or Herta. You could probably play blindfolded and he will still perform pretty well. His most commonly used teams will most likely be the ones with Herta or Jade and Hypercarry team. In a Herta team, both Tribi and Robin will be really good, and each has their advantages, so it's a bit hard to compare directly since it changes the team setup required. Robin, for example, would really prefer going Sustainers with RMC so that Robin can get her ultimate very quickly, otherwise it's very slow at the start, and after her ultimate there can be some more downtime, whereas Tribi is easily played with a sustain and is also more consistent in longer scenarios. Hence, if you're aiming for very fast clears, I recommend Robin instead since you will not suffer much or even at all from the downtime, and hence will give you a lot of damage in a very short period of time. But for certain 5 enemy scenarios or if you want the team to be more comfortable to play, I recommend Tribi instead. Rami is honestly not a bad choice either, especially at E1, but Rami does not have AoE attacks or is able to advance as frequently as both Tribi and Robin, which can matter especially in Herta teams because it directly contributes to Herta's energy and hence her damage. In my previous video, I was comparing Jade to Anaxa, but honestly Jade plus Anaxa is really powerful combo. The idea is that Jade gives Anaxa the Debt Collector obviously, and since Anaxa takes 2 actions in a single turn, or 4 actions with Sunday, he becomes a Jade Supercharger. And in just about 1 cycle, you get so many actions, it's actually quite funny. And if you run Sustainers like with perhaps RMC or Tribi, you can increase the number of actions further, which makes the team even more fun and potentially incredibly strong. Since Jade gives 30 speed, you can give Anaxa more damage, or you can reduce the duration of the rotation, which means more damage in a shorter period of time. The downsides to this team is that it is slightly limited to many enemies, so probably 5 target scenarios, or if you have E1 Jade, that solves the issue as well. And you also probably need Sunday for this to really pop off. A more budget-friendly version could be Jade, Anaxa, Bronya, Tingyun, but you have to run Sustainers. Another alternative way to play Hyper Anaxa is actually an Eagle build with attack boots. Probably the only scenario where you can run attack boots other than with Sparkle. You need about 101 speed, so 4 speed substats, and the idea is that Anaxa will advance his action to a pseudo 135 speed and take his action before Sunday. I mean, you can do this with 161 as well, but you would have to run speed boots. The downside is that just like the Jade team, this will probably lose the first turn as compared to other scenarios, so it's technically worse for a very short duration, and you most likely have to keep your ultimate if a new wave is coming in, so Anaxa can immediately advance his action again. Hence, this has the potential to be a very strong setup, but it's slightly harder or more inconvenient to play. The same kind of goes for Eternal Carcass, except it's a lot easier. You can run roughly 9 less speed substats and this gives you extra crit damage or attack, and after the first turn, Anaxa will have his 135 speed even when going into a new wave, because you can still keep the speed boost. The problem is you need 3 enemies at minimum most of the time, otherwise it can mess with your rotation, so if you're brute forcing lower target stages, this never really functions properly. Like I said earlier, Anaxa can genuinely be used with so many other teams, even if slightly non-ideal, because he doesn't demand as much resources from the team as typical damage carries, since he already gives himself so much crit damage and damage boost on top of being able to be played SP positive. Some teams that I think could really work as a facial team. Instead of Topaz, Mose or March, you can run Anaxa instead, as he gives 2 actions every turn, and also helps the facial team deal with more scenarios due to having higher AoE damage. And if it's the normal 1 to 2 targets that facial already excels at, Anaxa still does great because of his bounce attack. Best part is, they are both win units, so Anaxa doesn't really have to face minus 20% damage or minus 40% damage often in such a team. I'm not sure if Anaxa refreshing his implant is considered applying a debuff, but if it is, I guess he could technically be used with Acheron as well, which definitely fits Acheron mains. Other teams I think could be decent are Argenti, Jingyuan, Yunui, Blade, Black Swan, Sele, Casteris, and maybe even Super Break teams. Most of these require more testing, as I'm not super sure how useful they would actually be, and honestly there might even be more interactions I'm missing out that people may eventually find out. What I'm very confident in right now is the Herta, Jade, Hypercarry Anaxa, and facial teams. Next, we have his Eidolons. Just like his Lycon, some Eidolons are better in certain scenarios. E1 and E2 are stronger in dual carry teams, especially when paired with units like Tribi and Robin, since they can deal additional damage themselves, while E4 and E6 are very obviously aimed at his individual damage and gives a bigger damage boost in such settings. E1 gives extra defense reduction and helps a bit with his SP usage, while E2 reduces all type rest from enemies, which not only increases his team's total damage, but also helps in brute forcing. E4 is a massive attack boost when using his skill, and hence why it looks much better in a hypercarry setting. And finally, E6 is an independent multiplier and also allows him to activate the additional 50% damage boost regardless of whether there is a second erudition or not, and makes him incredibly strong in Hypercarry and teams like with Facial as if he wasn't already strong enough before. Hence, for E1 versus S1, it kind of depends on where you want to use Anaxa in. However, as a lot of Anaxa's value comes from being able to be played in many scenarios and many teams, I value S1 over E1 because it allows Anaxa to do just that. Though honestly, being erudition, his free-to-play options are not bad either. So if you want to skip S1 entirely, it's not the end of the world even if you have to run ERR rope at times. I think Anaxa will be very strong for quite a long time and is a very good pull for meta and endgame players, but like I said, still finds the most value in dual carry teams relative to other units in the game because pretty much no other unit is able to do it as well as he can, and hopefully with this guide you can get the most out of your Anaxa. That's pretty much it for this guide. Thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe, see you next time.